Hello and welcome to another edition of the Bastard Review. This time around I'm looking at the NWA's very first Starrcade. This event took place on November 24th, 1983 at the Greensboro Coliseum in Greensboro, North Carolina. We start off the night with the Masked Assassins taking on Bugsy McGraw and Rufus Jones. It seems like Bugsy and Rufus aren't really a team so much as single wrestlers paired up for this match. Bugsy's an interesting wrestler in that he panders to the audience and mocks his opponents, shaking his legs back and forth. Rufus must be the James Brown of the NWA because he does a lot of dancing in the ring. It's kind of charming, but also amusing to hear the crowd cheer so loudly for such a simple body slam that would get little to no reaction today. Bugsy and Rufus spend most of the early part of the match beating up on the Assassins, then Assassin number 1 gives Rufus a rake of the eyes, tags in his partner, and number 2 spends about 20 seconds wearing Rufus down, only for him to bounce back and make the hot tag. For those not in the know, a hot tag is when the face is getting beat down, but somehow manages to get back to his corner to tag in his fresh partner. The end sees Rufus with the upper hand over number 1, only for number 2 to come in and roll him up for the pin. I found it very odd that the referee counted because number 2 wasn't the legal man. Maybe the NWA had a rule that I don't know about, or the ref was in the pocket of the Assassin's manager, Paul Jones, but it sure wasn't because he was distracted. It seems like a silly way to end the match because it makes the ref look like an idiot. I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. After that, Tony Schiavone is backstage in the locker room, and it's amusing because while he's talking, you can see Piper and Flair in the background having some kind of conversation, and at one point, Piper does this little spin dance that got a chuckle out of me. Up next, Johnny Weaver and Scott McGee take on Mark Lewin and Kevin Sullivan. The match starts off strong with Sullivan and McGee going back and forth for a few minutes. Lewin and Sullivan use most of the match to dominate, but they tag each other in way too often. I'm talking 5 seconds in and then a tag. I can understand how you don't want to get too winded and want to keep the fresh man in the ring to wear down your opponent, but this is ridiculous. The NC's Lewis and Sullivan pick up the win, and then for good measure, they bust open McGee's forehead with a foreign object from Lewin's manager, Gary Hart. A short but decent enough match, and I suspect McGee will get a modicum of revenge down the road. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. After that, Carlos Colon takes on Abdullah the Butcher in a match where weapons are legal. The story is that Carlos has come all the way from Puerto Rico to face Abdullah because the match is illegal there. Abdullah controls the match at the beginning, but once Carlos grabs the weapon that Abdullah pulled from his tights, Carlos turns the match around. At one point he goes for a cover, but Abdullah launches him off and Carlos lands on the ref. Then Abdullah goes for an elbow drop, but Carlos moves out of the way and the ref gets the bump instead. Carlos gets in the figure 4, but out of nowhere Hugo Savinovich, Abdullah's manager, interferes and costs Carlos the win. Another short, decent match, but I'm kind of disappointed. This is the 3rd consecutive match where the heel has won. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Up next, Wahoo McDaniels and Mark Youngblood go head-to-head with Dick Slater and Bob Orton Jr. Early in the match, Youngblood accidentally sends Slater to the ropes and he goes over, but holds on, stopping from hitting the mats. Apparently in the NWA, if you throw your opponent over the ropes, you lose by disqualification. Why did Slater save Youngblood from being disqualified? They could have gotten an easy win out of it, and it would have been the heelish thing to do. Another part that doesn't make sense is Youngblood gets the upper hand on Orton, and Bob retreats to his corner. It looks like Slater tags in, but when Orton recuperates, he stays in the ring as the legal man. Instead of protecting Orton, why didn't Slater acknowledge the tag and take on Youngblood? Later, Orton gives Youngblood a nice superplex, but otherwise it's a pretty by-the-numbers match. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. After that, the Great Kabuki defends his NWA TV title against Charlie Brown in a mask versus title match. In case you don't know, Charlie Brown is actually Jim Valiant, the Boogie Woogie Man. He wrestled under the name Brown when he was banned from wrestling as Valiant. This match had a weird stipulation. Charlie had 15 minutes to pin Kabuki, or the title couldn't be won, even though the match would go on. One would think it's a way to keep the title on Kabuki and Charlie from unmasking. Brown wins, but not within the first 15 minutes. But he does win, title and all, which begs the question, why have the stipulation in the first place if that's your end result? If anything, Kabuki's manager, Gary Hart's reaction to the loss was more entertaining than most of the in-ring action. An alright match that doesn't have much going on in it. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Dusty Rhodes cuts a great promo about being the #1 contender to face the winner of the title match, if you will. Up next, Roddy Piper takes on Greg Valentine in a dog collar match. What a brutally entertaining brawl this was. Both men utilized the collar for maximum damage. One particularly painful looking bump was when Piper was on the mat. Valentine goes for an Irish whip, but Piper comes alive and yanks on the chain, pulling Greg down via the collar. Previously, Piper and Valentine had faced for the US title with Greg going over and attacking Roddy's ear, and during this match, Piper's ear gets busted open and just bleeds. Just a really great match that easily draws you into their feud. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. Jack and Jerry Briscoe defend their NWA World Tag Team titles next against Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat. The previous month, both teams had been trading the belts back and forth. It seemed like things would be decided for good tonight. Both are established teams and worked very well with each other. About mid-match, Jerry has Steamboat on the mat in an arm bar when, an impressive feat of strength, Ricky lifts Jerry up and slams him back down onto the mat. I really have to question giving Steamboat and Youngblood the titles when just a month later, Ricky announced his fleeting retirement from wrestling, thus causing the titles to be vacated. Perhaps the NWA hoped they could sway him leaving by giving him the strap? I don't know. A good match that had the crowd whooping and hollering. I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. Finally, we come to the main event. Harley Race defends his NWA World Heavyweight title against Ric Flair in a steel cage. Back in June, Race had won the title from Flair and had since put a bounty on him, offering $25,000 to anyone who could stop Flair from returning to seek a rematch. Orton and Slater took the bounty, and seemingly Flair retired in August, only to return a month later, attacking those who had tried to end his career and challenging Race to the title match. Thus, it was decided the match would be in a steel cage to avoid any outside interference. This was a back-and-forth 20-some minute chess match. Race would have the upper hand, then Flair would get a sudden burst of energy, and the momentum would change in his favor. This was really a huge win for Flair because even though it was his third title reign, it solidified his reputation as a main eventer and title holder. I was surprised how much of an active role the referee took in keeping things fair and down the middle, going so far as to pull Race off Flair in the corner by his hair. A really exciting match that has a lot of story behind it. It really is something to see, and it truly deserves a 10 out of 10. Overall, NWA Starrcade 93 is a just above average show. The last 3 matches are worth your attention, while the rest of the card is simply average. At the time it was made, this whole card probably would have gotten a better rating, but few of the matches have really stood the test of time. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again to another Bastard review when I review another wrestling DVD in my collection, or anything else that crosses my path.